Nearly 3,500 years have passed since God gave the Ten Commandments to Moses. They were so important and so timeless that they were written in stone, and they were so vital to the personal relationship between God and mankind that God wrote them in his own hand. The commandments stated basic rules for godly living. They expressed concepts that make up the foundation for civilized society. For centuries, Satan has warred against God's commandments, declaring them to be unduly restrictive, out of date, and not suitable for public display. One noted legal scholar referred to the Ten Commandments as the 10 suggestions. He asserts that they were not binding on us, and they were mere suggestions when they were offered by God. Others have claimed that the commandments that were set forth at Moses' time are outdated for contemporary society. In 2005, a thin majority of the United States Supreme Court justices ruled that public display of the Ten Commandments in government buildings is unconstitutional, notwithstanding the fact that Moses and the commandments are depicted on the doors and walls of the U.S. Supreme Court building in Washington, D.C. Controversies continue to swirl around the commandments. The dark forces of evil have engaged in ongoing efforts to block them from everyday application. And so the question arises, do the Ten Commandments have a legitimate place in the world today, or are they appendages of a bygone era? We share this tiny planet Earth with approximately 8.25 billion other people. Very few of us live in solitary, isolated existences. In almost all instances, we live in community with other people. Living in community requires that there be some restraints imposed so that order is maintained and the rights that have been given to us by God are preserved. Some basic law is essential for people to coexist, because absent restraints, chaos would occur. By the time that the Ten Commandments were issued, some laws had already been established by tribal leaders. The Code of Hammurabi, for example, dates back to 1750 BC in ancient Babylon. That code became famous for the tort standard known as an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But the code also covered other subjects, including property law, criminal law, and family law. Rules were required for some semblance of order to be maintained in the social settings of everyday living. When Moses wrote about the Ten Commandments, he went to great lengths to point out that those standards came from God. Their significance as rules articulated by God was underscored by the dramatic events surrounding the delivery of the commandments. These laws were essential to the relationship between God and mankind. When the Israelites reached Mount Sinai in their third month of freedom, God spoke to Moses, instructing him to have the people reflect on the protection that God had provided them from the Egyptian army, and to remember the provisions of food and water that had been miraculously given to them by God. Read Exodus 19:3 and 4. God wanted them to recognize that God had been with his people all along and had shown his heart for the people by supernaturally meeting their needs. God forewarned the people through Moses that he would arrive on the mountain in a dense cloud to address the people. See Exodus 19:9. To prepare for the meeting with holy God, the people were required to consecrate themselves, wash their clothes, and be ready to hear from God, albeit from a safe distance at the base of the mountain. See Exodus 19:10 through 12. And 3 days later, just as God had promised, he arrived in a thick cloud accompanied by thunder and lightning and a very loud trumpet blast. Exodus 19:16. The voice of God spoke, Exodus 19:19. In the face of that kind of fanfare, the nation of Israel heard God speak the Ten Commandments, read Exodus 20:1 through 17. The people were awestruck but fearful and asked Moses to intercede on their behalf for all future communications with God, read Exodus 20, verses 18 and 19. The Ten Commandments set forth essential principles for godly living. The first four commandments described the relationship that was to be maintained between God and his people. Read Exodus 20, verses 1 through 11. God was their one and only God. He was superior to any other force and was ruler over all, as had been demonstrated by the 10 plagues preceding the release of the Hebrew nation from Egypt. No physical images of God were permitted. After all, God is spirit, see John 4:24, and therefore he cannot be adequately depicted in a physical form. God's name was never to be uttered in a disrespectful or vain way, and the people were called to observe a Sabbath day, a day of rest and replenishment for their relationship with God. The next 6 commandments dealt with interpersonal relationships among people. Parents were to be honored, Exodus 20, verse 12. Murder, adultery, theft, perjury, and coveting were prohibited, Exodus 20, 13 through 17. The final 5 commandments were summarized by Paul in his letter to the Romans. The commandments, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet, and any other commandment are summed up in this word, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no wrong to a neighbor, therefore love is the fulfilling of the law. That's Romans 13, 9 and 10. When Jesus was asked to identify the most important law, he stated a 2-part summary that encapsulated the meaning of the laws that had been given by God. Jesus answered, the most important law is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength. The second is like this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these. That's Mark 12, 29 through 31. The explanation by Jesus drew from Deuteronomy 6, verses 4 and 5, and Leviticus 19, 18 and 34, but also summarized the 10 commandments. The commandments were necessary for the development of Jacob's clan into an orderly nation. Their precepts were important at the time of Jesus, and they remain vital to a healthy and godly relationships today. The commandments were essential to converting the Hebrew nation into a holy nation of priests, read Exodus 19, 5 and 6. And that objective applies to believers today, that is, the believers who make up the church, see 1 Peter 2, 9. So as we reflect on the 10 commandments, consider these questions for introspection, if you will. Question number 1, what is the role of law in civilized society? Question number 2, how do each of the 10 commandments relate to today's world? And question number 3, how has the need for the 10 commandments changed since the time of Moses? God created mankind in his image and gave them authority to rule over the earth, read Genesis 1:26. God loves people and wants what is best for them. Therefore, he promotes order and an attitude of selflessness, read James 3:16 and Philippians 2, verses 3 and 4. God's laws foster a stable environment that promotes healthy attitudes and that are essential for blessed and godly living circumstances today. The nature of mankind has not changed since the time of Adam and Eve, and God is the same yesterday, today, and always, see Malachi 3:6 and Hebrews 13:8. The 10 Commandments were a big deal when they were first given, and they remain important for us today. May we embrace the meaning of the commandments and shamelessly display them as reminders of God's plan for mankind.